Hi, I'm James J. Trades, author of the book, Don't Stop Your Mind. If you go into a very large movie theater, or in any kind of a studio involving projection, for an example, the ride at Disney World now, there's one called Soaring. In that ride, you're in a seat and you're lifted up, and you were surrounded by a picture, a projection, and sound. And you literally feel like you are there. You do not perceive, and you cannot perceive that you're in a theater. You feel like you're flying, and you feel like everything that is around you is absolutely real. What's my point? What I just described is a metaphor for our reality. A finding that has some physicists mystified and others amazed is that at the subatomic level, reality is pixel-like, exactly like a computer-generated reality. I would submit that that is exactly what it is. Only it is not a physical computer. The computer is and are our souls, God, and the greater reality. Back to that theater. If one of the members of the audience were to question, say we had a philosopher, the question, is that an objective reality out there? What he might do is get very, very close to what we know to be the screen. What would happen? He would discover a pixel-like formation. He would discover that this extremely real reality is in fact not an objective reality at all, but rather tiny points of light arranged such that a living picture emerges. That is exactly how reality works. We project from our souls, in essence, a program that we then project ourselves into and believe we are living within an objective reality. The fact is, we are always inside of our consciousness. We are always inside of our souls. There is no reality outside of consciousness. If you could eliminate consciousness, which cannot be done, but if you did, reality would cease to exist. Let me say that again, and let me make that very plain. The only true reality is consciousness. Nothing else exists.
What is this thing called dreaming? Because for some of us, it's so real, and yet it's not, right? And we know that there's this awakening. So is it just the way you would describe dreaming, a shift in our consciousness, or is there some more that you have found in your research?
Whatever else it might be, it is certainly a different state of consciousness, right? I find dreams fascinating because they provide amazing clues to the nature of reality. Let me give you just an example now that I said this, although it doesn't answer your question directly. I'll get back to it. When you're dreaming, you have a character in the dream. You are a person in the dream. That person may be a completely different person than you are in real life. It feels like you, but you are in a different context, in a different place. There's no continuity with your waking life. Let's call that person an avatar. It's the avatar you have within your dream. And you witness your dream from the point of view of that avatar, through the eyes and senses of that avatar. And that dream has an entire universe, has a world. You walk through cities, through streets, you see trees, you meet other people. There is an entire universe in which your avatar is inserted, and all that is dreamed up, and it feels completely real. It feels like this. When you're dreaming, you cannot tell the difference. I had lucid dreams in which I asked myself this question, can I tell the difference? And I couldn't. Yet when you wake up, you realize that although you had an avatar in the dream, that avatar was in your consciousness, not your consciousness in the avatar. The entire world of your dream was in your mind, not your mind in that world. Reality was the opposite of what it felt like in the dream. I think that's a clue to what is happening right now. What is happening right now is that our bodies, our personal identities, the world we are inserted in, all of that is in our consciousness, which ultimately is only one, not the other way around. And that is the categorical inversion that gets us completely lost, even in science today, generating what's called in science a hard problem of consciousness. We can't explain consciousness. Well, guess what? You're just looking at it from the wrong angle. So whatever else they might be, dreams are a very strong hint to the nature of reality, I think. A hint that we get every night. Every one of the 7 billion people on the planet get that hint every night. And we still can't figure it out. And it's quite amazing. It's quite ironic.
Yeah.
Now, if reality itself is a dream, a collective dream that we're dreaming together, then our nightly dreams are somewhat different, right? They are personal, they are idiosyncratic, they are not collective. The way I tend to look at it is when we wake up, we plug into the collective dream. And we do what mind does, what consciousness does, which is to dream, but to dream together. At night, we unplug. And we continue to do what consciousness does, which is to dream, but we do that alone. That is as far as I would go at this point in my interpretation of what dreams are. But to me, the key importance of dreams is not necessarily what exactly they are, but what they tell, what they hint at. My consciousness certainly shifted in the past 5-6 years. That's certainly the case. 10 years ago, I was a staunch materialist. I was in the midst of science. I was quite arrogant. I dismissed every other psychic function except the intellect. I dismissed them as unreliable and baloney and woo and flaky and whatnot. As for advice, I would just say, yeah, it's a cliche, huh? It's a cliche that got new meaning to me. Listen to your heart. Go with the flow. Don't fight it. Don't let the ego say, well, your life should be this, should be that. You know, life is dynamic. Everything gets created and destroyed. It never stays the same. And the Greeks, thousands of years ago, already said that. Everything flows. So go with the flow and see where it brings you. I have no idea where it will lead us. I only know that the state of our culture today, the way we look upon the world, ourselves, the nature of reality, is sick. It is crazy, immature, and pathological. And hopefully it will change. I don't know if it will.
Yeah, and that's a very good question and consideration in terms of where really will we be going. I mean, I feel a lot of hope that we will transcend this madness, as you very well also put it. But again, I guess that's left to be seen in terms of how we, and based on our thinking, how we will continue to play out the nature of this reality and see what manifests from there.
We have to face this problem and resolve it. If it is not resolved, if we live in conflict, we will inevitably create a society that will perpetuate this conflict. This conflict doesn't end. You may cover it over. You may run away from it. You may somehow forget it and accept it. But there is the conflict inwardly. in our relationship with all human beings. Each one of us thinks we're independent individuals with his own sick, narrow problems and limited points of view. But when one begins to inquire deeply, as we are doing now, and I hope we can do this together, when we are inquiring deeply why human beings, after so many million years, why have we become like this? Divided, fragmented, contradictory, confused, everlastingly seeking pleasure, never ending his sorrow, never comprehending his relationship to the world and to each other. Why there is this infinite conflict between man and man. That is the problem. That is the crisis. It's not political crisis, economic crisis, or the crisis of war. But the crisis is in ourselves. And we apparently cannot face that crisis, or unwilling to face it. And so we try to escape from that fact through various forms of entertainment, religious, political, football, and all the rest of it. So please be serious, if you will, with regard to this question, because it's very important, because we are facing wars. War is this ultimate result of our ending conflict within ourselves.
Distressing experiences in childhood may set up patterns which in later life will produce mental conflict. Such conflicts lead to the same feeling of insecurity which was felt as a child. When such conflicts paralyze the individual, preventing him from acting freely, he is said to have a neurosis. Let us see how a neurosis develops.
This present struggle in the 20th century, when we have killed more men than we did in the whole of history beforehand, this 20th century, which was heralded back in the early 1900s as a century of peace and rationality, this 20th century marks the disintegration of a period in human life, and like the neurotic, before he goes for therapy, his neurosis gets worse and he fights the harder to hang on to the neurosis. And then finally he collapses and has to get treatment. Now our world is in that kind of situation.
To be alive at this time means to be in the midst of great changes. Sea changes, people even call them. From a certain point of view, you could call it the flood times, where change has become a flood, whether it's technological change or cultural change or political change or economic change. And not all the changes are good. I think everybody can see and feel that. Change is happening to us and all around us all the time. And yet, in order to make a conscious change, a person encounters all kinds of difficulties, as does a culture. Right now, modern culture is assaulted by changes, but trying to make meaningful changes within all that flood of change is very difficult. And the same thing inside a person.
Please understand something. As long as you stay in this nation, the society of this world, you'll always be running. Look, there's no place to run to. And do you understand that this world that I'm talking about, this world of the mad bulldozers, you understand we're telling you that it is inside you as well as outside? That's where you can start to make a change of scenery, a permanent change of scenery. You find something inside yourself, begin to understand there's a new country inside yourself. It will come to you.
Now there's a change in the weather, there's a change in the sea, and from now on there'll be a change in me. My walk will be different, my talk and my name. Nothing about me is gonna be the same.
Well, I better tell you something. Let me ask you a question. Who would you say has full authority in this universe? God or man? Who would you say has right views, has sanity, has true wisdom, truth or society? Which?
As for me, if you want to know what I think, I'll show you something.
Which are you going to obey from now on? You know what you've obeyed up to this time. You obeyed all the madness of the machine guns and the bayonets and the rifles and the hand grenades of society in which they told you that you're here to fight. And you do your part of fighting and hating. If you don't hate
This way.
someone else, will hate you.
Come on, don't be shy. I think this will help explain.
Can you imagine what society is telling you to do?
Come along, come along.
Can you imagine a truly decent, good, spiritual human being? Can you imagine him wanting anything to do with the hurting of society?
Over here.
Can you imagine him wanting to get tough with anyone? You see, you get tough if you think it's necessary. If you think there's something to defend. There's nothing to defend. Nothing at all. You have nothing to defend whatever except your delusions. Anytime you defend anything, you're defending your sickness and nothing else.
Come on, come on.
Anytime you get self-righteous, you're being righteous over nothing, over a zero. But you think that nothing is something, and so you fight for it.
This way.
And then you have the nerve to complain when you get wounded. If you weren't on society's mad battlefield, you wouldn't get hurt at all, would you? So whose fault is it if you cry, if you scream, if you complain, if you feel persecuted? Shall I tell you a characteristic of sanity? A sane man or woman never feels persecuted at all.
Come on.
Never feels persecuted, never feels left out, never feels hurt by anyone or anything. I'm telling you how a sane human being operates.
This way.
Of course, you don't know much about that, but I'm introducing it to you. So one day maybe you'll understand. You'll understand by personal experience what it means to have such a goodness inside of you.
Stay by me, huh?
You can't go along with the badness
Nearly there now.
of yourself anymore, therefore not along with the badness of the world out there.
You see that? That's where I was born. You know, one day my mother, she put me on her knee and she said to me, Gaston, my son, the world is a beautiful place. You must go into it and love everyone. Try to make everyone happy and bring peace and contentment everywhere you go. And so I became a waiter. Well, it's not much of a philosophy, I know. But, well, fuck you. I can live my own life in my own way if I want to. Fuck off. Don't come following me.
If I do not know who I am, then I have to join the herd in order to be sure that I'm somebody, that I am at least like the rest, that I have a place somewhere, that I'm not completely disoriented. If I have a strongly developed sense of I do not need to have an obsessional need to be part of the herd, because my role in the world is given by my own experience of I. Now, again, it has to be said that our lack of sense of identity leads to another phenomenon, and that is the obsessional need to conform with everybody else, naturally.
To what extent the individual is part of a collective, or to what extent the individual is supposed to stand on her or his own feet. So, in the one case, the group in which you grew up in, primarily, which is your family, and then also maybe the village or the tribe, is very important, and actually you identify first of all with the group, and secondly only with yourself. And that is one solution. And the other solution is that no, you identify with yourself, and the task of education is precisely to find that self and to learn to stand on your own feet and not be dependent on the group you came from.
This is a delightful experience if you go that far. Go all the way with it. You'll understand what I'm talking about from yourself, not just from the talk that you're being given. The life of a soldier on a battlefield is a pretty perilous place. It's a nice place to get hurt all the time if you want to stay out there. We're offering you a spiritual alternative, not man's alternative, just merely a switch from one battleground to another, but an alternative where you leave the battleground altogether. There you are, the soldier out there firing at others and being fired at and being wounded, and all those sharp weapons out there. But take a soldier who suddenly realizes where he is and realizes that he doesn't want anything to do with the insanity of the world. He can walk off the battlefield if he wants, can't he? You know what happens to a soldier who walks off the battlefield? We've got an illustration going here. He gets punished, doesn't he, for desertion? You start deserting the battlefield of this sick society. You start to walk off that battlefield and watch how you be accused of something. Watch how you'll be called a deserter from society's sanity and right ways. Well, I better tell you something. Let me ask you a question. Who would you say has full authority in this universe? God or man? Who would you say has right views, has sanity, has true wisdom, truth or society? Which? Which are you going to obey from now on? You know what you've obeyed up to this time. You obeyed all the madness of the machine guns and the bayonets and the rifles and the hand grenades of society, in which they told you that you're here to fight. And you do your part of fighting and hating. If you don't hate someone else, we'll hate you. Can you imagine what society is telling you to do? Can you imagine a truly decent, good, spiritual human being? Can you imagine him wanting anything to do with the hurting of society? Can you imagine him wanting to get tough with anyone? You see, you get tough if you think it's necessary. If you think there's something to defend. There's nothing to defend. Nothing at all. You have nothing to defend whatever except your delusions. Anytime you defend anything, you're defending your sickness and nothing else. Anytime you get self-righteous, you're being righteous over nothing, over a zero. But you think that nothing is something, and so you fight for it. And then you have the nerve to complain when you get wounded. If you weren't on society's mad battlefield, you wouldn't get hurt at all, would you? So whose fault is it if you cry, if you scream, if you complain, if you feel persecuted? Shall I tell you a characteristic of sanity? A sane man or woman never feels persecuted at all. Never feels persecuted, never feels left out, never feels hurt by anyone or anything. I'm telling you how a sane human being operates. Of course, you don't know much about that, but I'm introducing it to you. So one day maybe you'll understand by personal experience what it means to have such a goodness inside of you. You can't go along with the badness of yourself anymore, therefore not along with the badness of the world out there.
The real work is about you taking care of your own house, your own garden, and if everybody did that, you know, unseen forces would come to aid. Man would, like Vernon Howard said, we can accept that God can become man to save man, but we can't accept that man can become God to save himself. It's one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard.
If you agree that 20th century humanity is in trouble and needs help, perhaps the answer may be found in that old proverb, "The Lord helps those who help themselves."
So if we really want to contribute something to the world, we contribute it first to ourselves, then this oneness, this wholeness, has nothing but of itself to give. You understand that? Do you know what you give? Do you know what you and me, myself too? Just go around the room. Each one of you gives what you are. How can it be anything else? How can you give anything except what you have? And what you have is what you are. And believe me, the exteriors of being a charity worker, of going to church, have no effect whatever on it. You can do that and still give madness to the world and give heartache to the world. So if I want to be good to you, I have to be good to me. They are inseparable. That's the only morality on earth, is for me to work real hard to change myself so that I don't cut you down, which gives me pleasure in cutting you down and criticizing you. Then, if I see you do something self-defeating and you want to work on yourself, I can make suggestions to you. If you don't want to work on yourself, then I have nothing to say to you at all. We don't try to change the nature of the dog that's been running through here because he's not able to understand these things. And most human beings are unable to understand them. Yes, Rudy?
How does daydreaming lead to violence?
The question was, how does daydreaming lead to violence? First, do any of you daydream? It's very simple. Follow the process. If you're working on yourself, it begins to decrease violence because you decrease the daydreams. All daydreams, one, are an escape from ourselves, as a general comment. Two, all daydreams have a need to prove itself as the star of the daydream show. I am nobody. I run a little shoe shop in town and it's practically a failure and I just make enough money to get by. So my substitute for my misery, and by the way, I could run that shoe shop and make just enough to make money and be a perfectly happy and free man, but I don't know that yet. And so I'm a young man, old man for that matter, and I daydream all day long between putting nails in shoes. I dream about myself being a successful, politician, military leader, somebody. I'm going to be somebody in this world. And I'll interrupt myself to give you an example of how you see this very commonly. I was in a library once, many years ago, and a man came in that I knew faintly over the years in Los Angeles. He was a middle-aged man, 40, 50, who knows. And I wasn't talking to him, but as he went out, he made a quick comment to the librarian as he passed out. And he said something like, "Boy, at my age, I better start trying to be someone." You could see this man's whole past and his future in that one comment. He wanted to be someone, not realizing that he doesn't have to be anyone at all, except a man who understands what he and life is all about. So, in the center of my daydreams is me, the star of the show. What? You name it. What are your daydreams? The great lover, the conquering hero, the spiritual leader, the great author, the what? You name it. I am in the center of this. And I will tell you that when you are controlled by daydreams, to get to the question, you have no conscience whatever. This is so, you're just not going to believe. I know you're not. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see 1 inch when you should see a mile, but it will go ahead. When you live in daydreams, from daydreams, and they have taken you over and possessed you, because you are in a state of sleep, this means you cannot see anything except this compulsive, mad, insane drive to get what you want in order to be someone, so that your daydream, which is all alone in that little shoe shop, will be the center of admiration of thousands of other people, or at least the new girlfriend of someone else. See, boy, when you have to confirm your own illusions, it isn't easy. So you have to go out and get all the allies you can, who will be on your own level, by the way, because they're doing the same thing. You're going to be trading. And so you do what you can to try to make yourself publicly prominent, either with one other person or as many as you can get. When this daydream becomes so hardened and so fixed, it just automatically and naturally leads to violence. Whether being cruel to this new woman or this new man you met, or to your wife or to your children, or to anybody that you can be cruel with and get by it, and it all be justified. And if there are other people, by the way, who are also captured by your daydream, which is quite likely because like attracts like, and people with similar daydreams come together and they say, "Ha, now there's 2 of us, let's pounce on him." And so they do. And so this leads to violence. Violence is mechanical unconsciousness. So if you don't want to be violent anymore, and I don't, and I'm not talking about necessarily physical violence, you can be the beginning of violence to have a hard, cruel look on your face, cut someone down with a look. See, that is violence, that is cruelty. So if you don't want to be violent anymore and destroy yourself with your own violence, then do what we suggested before of trying to interrupt your thoughts at bedtime or all day long. Interrupt them at any time you can. And all these other exercises that we had earlier today will help you do this. Everything works together. Everything you have heard works toward the idea of wholeness, of non-fragmentation, of finding yourself, of giving up violence. Everything contributes to everything else because it is one whole thing. And finally on this, I must cease to love violence. I must cease to love it for its distraction value, for taking me away from my own pain. When I'm violent and in an agitated mood, isn't that wonderful? I can temporarily leave behind the fact that my wife left me, and that I'm 60 years old and I've been a flop all my life financially. So I turn to violence. I will tell you again, finally, on this. Do you see, I'll put it in the form of a question, do you begin to see that you don't have to be anything or anyone at all? Because you are indeed, and I am indeed, nothing at all. And in that is our freedom. If I am someone, I have violence, I have fragmentation, I have pain, I have anxiety, and there's no end to it. There's no end to it. If I can begin to see this, I can start reversing the process.
Why is it that it's so hard for me to give up what I call my individuality, this separate identity?
The question was, why is it so hard for me to give up my so-called individuality, which is the same thing as false personality, which is the same thing as a mechanical man, which is the same thing as misery? Right down to the very base of it, to get right to the bottom of it, is the fear of death. Because all I know of myself is what I have imagined of myself. Look at the 1,001 labels. Start with labels and naming again. And notice, by the way, how all labels do have opposites, and I will give some of them. Here, I'm talking out loud. Here's a man working on himself, we'll say, talking out loud, trying to work. This is fine. I have labels of myself being a failure. My neighbors are more successful than I. That's a label. He has labeled himself a failure. And that gives him a certain amount of pleasure, by the way, because now he can hate. Life has cheated me. I have a right to have your dough. I have a right to be rude to you. So I have a label of being, all right, I have a label of being a successful kind of man. I have a label of being a good mother. I care so much for my children. If you really did, you'd wake up. You have nothing to give your children but what you are, remember? What are you giving your children? So, I am thinking that I am all these different kind of people. I may be physically a mother or a father, of course, but I have these labels on me, which gives me a sense of security, I think. So the idea of giving up these labels means the most terrifying thought I can imagine. Nothing. Going to war or walking through a jungle with tigers is nothing compared with the very idea of the death of what I call me. And we don't see that it's the death of what I call me that sets me free. Boy, I'll tell you, how many times do any of us have to get knocked down before this gets through our thick heads? Nothing is more terrifying, therefore nothing is resisted more, and it is resisted in ways so subtle you can't begin to see them, which is why we must start with the most obvious resistances. Criticizing what we heard here, what you heard here perhaps. Because there's a little part of you that has become anxious over what it's heard, and it says, I'm not going to do that. Then you'll find, or I'll find, all other kind of lies to back up the initial lie. Like, my church knows better, why shouldn't I leave the thinking to someone else? They're an established authority. Anything that has endured as long as the church surely must know what they're doing, and the whole business. So I have to begin to see all of this, the whole thing, put together, so I can see that I must do exactly the opposite of what I used to do. Instead of building my egotism, I have to begin to die to it, to give it up. In any way I can. Any work is good work. Any work. Just being here is good work. Then when I have passed, shall I quote? Then when I have passed through the valley of the shadow of death, I understand the most startling thing that ever occurred to me in my life. You'll sit there in your chair and you'll gasp for about 15 minutes once you see it. Which is that outside of the physical birth, you weren't even born, to say nothing of dying. You weren't born into all these labels. They never came to you until society and our own confusion started giving them to us. You begin to see that you weren't born at all. What happened is that all these ideas from out there, which we consented to because we didn't know any better when we were young, began to make us me, the born John Smith, born in so-and-so at a certain year, and at 15 he became interested in electronics, and at 20 he went to college, and at 25 he was already head of the say the word for me, the company who sell all these electrical things, not seeing that society gave him this label. Now, this is him, this is me, which he was not born with at all, but overlaid on him. As you see one, you see the other. When you see that there's no birth, you see that there's no death. If nothing was born, how can that nothing die? It doesn't make sense, does it? See? So, dying to my labels, to my illusory ideas about myself, is a certain kind of death. The death of the illusion that I exist as Tom Smith and Mary Jones, this or that kind of a person. Now I'm free. What more can I say? Do you understand? Look back. Look back maybe to something your parents told you, or your teachers told you, or your friends told you, as to how you should be. What? You should be good, you should be successful, you should be independent, you should be a go-getter, you should be a married woman and raise a nice family. What they told you to do didn't work out the way you thought it would, did it? That should be a clue that someone put ideas into our sleeping people, made us asleep. But this is as far as we're going with it. Now we're going to reverse and drop it all off. A person who doesn't exist does not have heartache, he does not have anguish, he does not have regrets over the past, he doesn't have hopes of the future, he simply lives as part of the whole, and he is the whole at the same time, he is part of the whole, and he has no problems. The idea of old age has no meaning. Physically it does, obviously. But the whole idea of old age has no meaning, because the opposite of old age is youth, and we no longer identify with youth. We no longer think I should be young, as I once was. We no longer think that, therefore the idea of older age is not a problem. Yes?
Periodically, intellectually, that really makes a lot of sense to me. I can kind of feel it for a moment. Why can't, why is it so difficult to maintain that truth, that realization?
Because the mechanicalness is like the mad flood rushing river. It's so overwhelming, is what I tell you. And I tell myself this, by the way, not every day, maybe every hour if I can do it. You get up and you arouse yourself with all the energy you can do to go against this. You're not going to get it coming to a few meetings like this and then going out and saying, man, that was inspiring, or that was good, or that was bad, or whatever. This is just the starter. And you have to do it individually. I have to do it individually. But we can help each other for that. The answer, again, is so simple, not much need be said about it. The flood of mechanical thought, of negative thought, is so overwhelming that it is difficult. We're trying to get this one little, the block in the way of the river. Then maybe a month later we'll get another block in it. And eventually we'll have the dam there, if that's a good illustration. And then the flow will be controlled. Then we will think when it is necessary, but not when it's unnecessary. Do you want to change that one? It is hard because I have let myself go on for 30, 50, 60 years until I became very intensely hardened. Now being hardened, boy, you've got to get a sledgehammer, knock off this hardness, cake of ice, cake of hard ice, you bring it out into the sunshine of a talk like this, a group like this, discussion like this, so that every day the sun can come down and melt a little bit of it. That's why it's hard, because it's hard because we're so hard. See, the last thing that my negative parts want to do is to even come to a place like this. And can you imagine how they would feel if they came here accidentally and didn't know what they were getting into and heard this? They'd get up and walk out, and it has happened, by the way. Yes. What we're trying to achieve, the question was go into a little bit the idea, which was given earlier, of getting aside by yourself and sitting in a chair, and first of all being conscious of your thinking, seeing your thoughts and observing them, and then making a conscious effort to break the flood of thoughts, the flow of thoughts, so that you're not thinking anything at all, but simply sitting there, seeing yourself sitting there, which is not thought at all. And to repeat, the value of this is you have begun to put an interruption into these mechanical thoughts in which most people live so permanently and hardened that they never know there is something outside of this. This is the big secret, outside of many other big secrets, to see that there's another way to use your whole self outside of mechanical thinking. But you have to study it. You have to ask, well, the man said mechanical thinking. What does that mean? He said habitual thinking. What does that mean? He said always reacting the way you always react. The dinner is cold in the cafe, and I always get mad when the waitress brings me cold soup. I always get angry. I get angry because I always get angry. So that is what he must mean by mechanical thinking. And at first it slows down a little bit as you continue to practice this. Then the time will come, as I said earlier, where you'll be able to detect the end of thinking for just a brief moment of time. But I'll tell you why this becomes so difficult. Because, see, we always come back to the same thing. The ending of thinking is the ending of me, what I call me. And if I am afraid of the death of what I have called me, the artificial self, the phony self, then the last thing I'm going to do is sit down in a chair and let me come to an end. See? Which is another thing we have to become aware of, the fear of coming to the end of thought, of thinking. Are you distracted or listening to me? All right, now, never mind what they're doing. You pay attention here. When I come to the end of thought, there is no me there at all, because the me is made up of my thinking, my labels, and emotions connected with it. And with my habitual activities, like every night I go, or every week I go to this club where my label becomes, oh, wait a minute. In one split, clear moment where there is no thought, I see the possibility, the first glimpse, of being a totally free human being. Because for in that one split second, I was not living in time. I was not living in memory thought. I was not connected with the past in any way at all. But I have to make a payment. In order to be free, I have to give up something. And what I have to give up is trash. That's a pretty good bargain, isn't it? I have to give up, in order to be a free human being, I have to be willing to give up my hell. That's a pretty good deal. But I don't call hell hell. I call it excitement. I call it being someone. See what I'm doing? In this one free moment, which I can achieve sooner or later by sitting down or by going through daily life in the right way, by working on myself, I see great possibilities for myself. I can see that it is the end of my illusory self, and therefore the end of all my problems. Boy, I don't know what else I want to do with my life. I don't know what else you'd want to do with yours, except find this, which can be done. I'm no longer in time, am I? Time is thought. All thought is in time, all conditioned. And as a side point, just for a minute, some conditioned thought is quite necessary. Again, otherwise I won't know how to bake the dinner. That is conditioned thought. It is thought and it's conditioned. Your neighbor is conditioned to cooking that same dish in another way. There's a matter of choice. You put paprika in the sauce if you want, and he doesn't. No problem. You take your choice in that. But it's the idea of conditioned thought that is in negativity that we're concerned with that makes us miserable. Then we can rise above it by being for one split second at first in this state of freedom. Then remember we said then we will alternate quite naturally throughout the day between practical thought. Negative thought is gone. We have nothing more to do with it, we hope. In practical thought, where I have to do things with my hands, garden or whatever, and simply being a conscious human being with no negative thoughts at all. Now I exist. I still exist. Nothing happens to me. That is, I don't die physically or anything till the time comes. But I exist, but I have no longer existed apart from anyone else on earth. And this is what love is. And that alone is what love is, where there's no opposite to me. Yes?
What, if anything, can I do to help my children wake up?
One, you answer that, please. Because I know everyone has already thought of the answer. Many of you have.
How can I help anybody? How can I save somebody when I haven't even started saving myself or seeing myself? The best help I can give to anybody is to find myself, save myself, and be myself. That alone will help another.
That's very easy to say, isn't it? That I'm going to help my children by helping myself. Let's see if you or I do it. And don't be disappointed when your children grow up and want nothing to do with this. Very few human beings find the way out. Which is part of your work, to understand and see this. And don't identify with your children or with your parents or your husband or wife. That's still part of the trap. That means you still want something from them. Don't want anything from anyone except bread and shoe repairs.
And now you're in Boulder City, Nevada, following Vernon. What brought you here?
Well, I had met the test society imposed. That is, everything that people said I should do, my parents, my friends, and so on, to get along in this world, in terms of success, you might say I had done. But the problem was, I was not happy. In fact, I was desperately unhappy with all of this going on. I had reached the point of literally breaking down in life because I had amassed all of this ability and a certain number of material possessions and so forth, but inwardly I was in conflict. About that time, a book of Vernon's appeared on the scene, and essentially Vernon offered an alternative way. He said to me, there is a power higher than thought, and if you are a serious person, a serious student of the truth, you can discover that power for yourself and utilize it in a practical way in your own everyday life.
But first of all, is New Life a religion? Is it a philosophy? What is it? Dorothy, we'll let you answer that.
Okay. New Life is a way that we can look inside ourselves. It's a way to grow inwardly. It's a way that we can see where our stress is coming from. And it's a way to get rid of stress and anxiety. It's a teaching. It's a philosophy.
But it's not a religion. I mean, you could be
not in the way you used to
Not
see
in
it.
the traditional
you wouldn't
sense.
have,
No.
like a person who becomes interested in new life wouldn't have to give up their religious beliefs to become involved in new life.
No, not in that sense. What New Life is really is a group of people who are tired of living their old ways of life with tension, frustration, those things. And we get together and we try to understand what is going on within us, why we have problems, why we get angry. So we're just a group of friendly people trying to figure out what is going on and trying to change our lives, trying to find something better within ourselves.
You mentioned, of course, last week, and Dorothy, let's talk a little bit about that. People can be successful in life, gain material things, reach goals, and
Yes.
still not be happy, still have inner conflict. What about that?
Well, it seems that as we go through life, we keep thinking, if I just make this amount of dollars, if I get this job, if I get this person in my life or out of my life, I will be happy. But haven't you ever noticed that it just doesn't happen that way? That there's always something missing. And that's because we are not content within ourselves. But in order to find out what we can become, we have to see what we are not. And this begins by self-observation.
And in your experience, do you feel that people can change just by being involved with your group, just by going to lectures and listening to these things?
Very definitely.
And what about your pamphlets? You brought some pamphlets
Well,
along.
Mr. Howard has written over a dozen little $1 booklets of various titles in which he describes some of the ways to overcome these problems. This one, for example, is called Conquer Anxiety and Frustration. Let me read a small passage that will tell us a little bit about it. He says, "There's only one basic cause of human frustration and one cure. A feeling of frustration arises when unnecessary desires are blocked. There it is, just 10 words. Understand them deeply and your life will flow as freely as a mountain brook." Now he mentions unnecessary desires are blocked. You know, how often have we wanted something and when we can't get it, we become angry, depressed, frustrated. We have to see that we're making demands on the world, and when these demands don't come true, we choose to get angry. And we're saying, getting angry doesn't do a thing for you. It doesn't solve the problem. It only hurts you. It makes you an unpleasant human being.
Philosopher Vernon Howard said that human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it, but those who do will become well. Soren Kierkegaard said, "There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to accept what is true." And it all really boils down to that right there. We suffer because we either believe in concepts and ideologies that simply aren't true and do not serve us, or we refuse to believe in that which is true. And therefore, we suffer. Those are the two main reasons why all people suffer.
Would you describe Vernon as just a wise man, a prophet, a new Messiah for the coming age? How would you describe him?
He's a wise man, and he knows the truth, and he tells it without any sugarcoating.
It's something that is not of this world. It's something that you can't find everywhere.
Are you saying he is not of this world, or what he's teaching is?
The teaching is not of this world.